Hi everyone, hope you're doing good. Welcome back to another episode in my What If scenario series. In this episode, we're going to be looking at what if Cliff Burton never died. Now, this is the fourth episode in the series, and you can catch up with the whole series in a playlist on the channel if you missed any. This will also link with my Metallica 40s series as well. That's also in a playlist on the channel. If you haven't seen any of these videos, basically what we do is we take a moment from rock and metal history and we change it and make our own story, just for a bit of fun really. But this episode is going to come out to coincide with the 25th anniversary of Cliff's passing on the 27th of September. So yeah, R.I.P. Cliff. But before we get into it, if you're new and you like the content I've been making, please consider subscribing, checking out all the other content on the channel. Please share with anyone you think might like this content. Drop a like if you go on to like the video. All feedback, comments, much appreciated. A massive thank you to all of those who have been watching, commenting, subscribing, really much appreciated. Now let's just get straight into the video. Now we're going to start, as we always do, by going through the original timeline. So back in 1986, Metallica was touring their third album, Master of Puppets, in Sweden. Whilst on the tour bus, the band were complaining about the beds being uncomfortable. Kirk and Cliff decided to have a game of cards to determine who will sleep in which bed. Cliff won and wanted to take Kirk's bed, and he did. But as they were driving through the countryside, the bus driver hit some black ice, that's still up for debate, and crashed the bus, killing Cliff as he was thrown out of the bus, and then it landed on him. His bandmates were absolutely devastated, with James accusing the bus driver to be drunk. Unfortunately, it was never proved. After the funeral, the band appointed Jason Newsted of Flotsam and Jetsam to stand in for Cliff. Then Jason played on 4 albums before leaving the band, and then after some turbulence in the early 2000s, they appointed Rob Trujillo to replace Jason, and he's been in the band ever since, appearing on the last 2 albums. Now we're going to go through our alternate timeline, and I was thinking about going either 2 ways with this. First one was Cliff gets really lucky with his injuries and no one gets killed, leaving the band to carry on with no member changes. Or Kirk wins the card game, keeps his own bed, and he dies instead. And that's the one that we're going to go with here. So, 1986, on that fateful day on tour in Sweden, touring Master of Puppets, the band would complain about their beds. Cliff and Kirk would have a game of cards. Cliff would lose and Kirk will win the card game, keeps his own bed, and then hours later the bus driver loses control and the bus tips over, killing Kirk, and the rest of the band would be left distraught after losing their bandmate and lead guitarist. Like in real life, they would cancel the tour early and hold a funeral service for their lost brother. After the funeral, James, Lars and Cliff decided to carry on in Kirk's name, as they thought that was what he would have wanted them to do. And they went about finding a new lead guitarist before restarting that tour. However, this would not be an easy task, because at the time Kirk was one of the best guitarists in the world, and there wouldn't be a lot of choice. The obvious choices would have been former band member Dave Mustaine, Gary Holt from Exodus, Alex Skolnick from The Legacy, Bobby Gustafson from Overkill, Greg Wells from Metal Church, Jakey Lee, formerly of Ozzy Osbourne, Chris Poland of Megadeth, and Dimebag Darrell of Pantera. However, I don't think any of these would fit. Dimebag and Alex would have been too young at the time, and I don't think the others would have wanted to have left their bands for Metallica. Other guitarists I was thinking of was Marty Friedman, Andreas Kieser, Phil DeMel, Rob Cavastany, Paul Gilbert and Steve Vai. But I don't think any of these would have worked because at this moment in history they were either too young or they were unknown to the music world. Therefore, I believe Metallica would have appointed Rick Hunolt of Exodus to be their new lead guitarist. I think his playing style would fit Metallica's sound very, very well. And also he was another student of Satriani, like Kirk was. I think they would have got lots of musicians, including Gary Holt and Joe Satriani, recommending Rick to Metallica. After this, they finished off the Master Tour and began working on their next album. In 1988, they released And Justice for All. I think the songwriting will be a little different to Real Life, as Cliff contributed a lot to Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, a little bit more than people think. He studied music theory at college and he actually taught harmony to James as well. So I think Cliff would have had more creative input than Jason would have had. I think it would sound a little bit more like Master of Puppets, but a little bit more progressive, maybe like a hybrid of Justice for All and Master of Puppets with more progressive elements in there. Metallica would become one of the pioneers of progressive thrash. To Live Is To Die wouldn't sound the same, as I think that was a song that Cliff was actually working on in real life, but he never had the chance to finish it. I don't think it would be an instrumental, although I still think they would have an instrumental. Maybe And Justice for All would be the instrumental for the song, for the album. The production and sound would be a little bit different, for the better I think. Cliff would have made sure you heard that bass. They would have dedicated the album to Kirk, and fans I think would have absolutely loved this album. Cliff's bass playing and songwriting would have been fantastic, and Rick Hunolt would have been really good fit for Metallica, playing some really great leads. 1991 they released the Black Album, and they appoint Bob Rock to be their producer like in real life, although I don't think it would sound as commercial as it did in real life. I think this because Cliff would have had more say on the songwriting and musical direction. I don't think the band really would allow Bob to have as much input as he did in real life. I still think it would have a slightly different sound, but I don't think it would be as commercial as the Black Album. They would want to push the progressive stuff more. Bob would want to push some of the catchy sounding stuff, but it would sound more progressive than Justice did. I think it would be a hybrid of Justice and the Black Album. I think there'd be quite a lot of songs similar to Harvester of Sorrow, and I don't think Nothing Else Matters would feature, as the band wouldn't have seen it fitting on the album. My Friend of Misery would be the instrumental on the album, like it almost was in real life. I think fans would really like the album. It wouldn't be the global phenomenon like it was in real life, but it would still be fairly successful. Metallica would still be one of the biggest bands in metal. Cliff would never have wanted Metallica to have gone down that route, really, I don't think. But I think he would have made a massive difference to their sound and their songwriting. In 1992, in real life, James had that horrendous pyrotechnic accident while on tour with Guns N' Roses. In this timeline, I don't think it would happen, as I don't think they'd be touring with Guns N' Roses. I think they'd be touring with slightly different bands. In 1994, they released Load, a few years earlier due to James not having that injury. I think this would sound completely different to the real Load. I think Cliff would have been listening to a lot of groove metal around this time, and I think he would have wanted Metallica to start writing a little bit more like that. So I think the sound of the album would be a bit more groove thrash, with maybe the progressive elements going away a little. They're aiming for the audience that would like early Metallica and new Pantera stuff. Bob Rock would reluctantly go along with this, but only for the next album to be a little bit more of his taste. Though I think he would still try and push his ideas and influence on the album. I think they would write an Unforgiven style ballad, maybe, and maybe another Black Album style song, but I think it would be mostly groove thrash. I think the fans would really like this album. The fans of the groove metal would really be on board with this as well. I think it would be fairly successful, not as successful as Load in real life, but I think it would be pretty popular in the fan base and in the underground. However, on the subsequent tour, I think Rick would decide to leave the band. After achieving all he could with them, there'd be nothing more he could add to the band, leaving them to have to find another new guitarist. In 1996, the band went about finding a new lead guitarist. There'd be many names listed for the job, including Zakk Wylde from Ozzy Osbourne, Bobby Gustafson again, Phil DeMel from Violence, Andreas Kisser from Sepultura, Rob Cavastany from Death Angel, and also Rocky George from Suicidal Tendencies, all being touted for the job. However, I think they would go with Kiko Loureiro from progressive Latin metal band Angra to fill in the spot. I think he'd be perfect for the band because his guitar playing is fantastic. He would add a little something a little different. You know, he plays a little bit different to Rick. And I think that this would have been a better fit for what Metallica would do on the next album. And in 1997, they would release Reload. And this is going to sound completely different to what Metallica was doing before. Bob finally got his way and the band followed suit. I think the album would sound more of a hybrid of the Black Album and Load in real life. It would have that more commercial feel. Cliff wouldn't feel that comfortable with this change, but would go along with it for the greater good of the band and the music. And after a while, I think he'd start to like what they were creating. I think Kiko would show a good account for himself, playing some great melodic shred solos. James would try something different with the vocals, more clean singing than on any other album. I don't think the album would be liked very much by fans. And yeah, the Metallica fans would really hate this album. And looking at the landscape of music at the time, I don't think anybody else would have either. It wouldn't have been that great commercially. I think there would have been some good songs and good solos, but I don't think it would have been received very well by anybody. This would lead Metallica to make the decision to cut ties with Bob Rock and find a new producer for their next album. In 2001, they appoint Rick Rubin to be their new producer, and they release Saint Anger a few years earlier due to the band not having the same issues. I think the band would go back to a groove metal sounding album. It would sound nothing like the real life album. I think it would be much better. It would be a truly heavy album, trying to get back some of the old fans and some of the new metal generation around that time. Cliff would be more motivated than ever to try and make the heaviest, most extreme album he can, and the rest of the band would follow suit. There would be solos, unlike the real Saint Anger. And once again, Kiko would put in a great performance. James would mix the vocal styles up using his new techniques with his old style, and I think the drums would actually sound good, unlike on the real Saint Anger. I think fans would love this album. I think it'd be very popular in the metal world. Not too well commercially, but that doesn't matter. Metallica wouldn't really be that bothered. However, after the tour, I think Kiko would leave to rejoin Angra, and he would leave on good terms, definitely put his mark on the Metallica sound, and once again they'll be looking for a new lead guitarist. In 2004, they appoint Alex Skolnick to be their new lead guitarist, and there isn't even any argument or debate. At the time, I think he would be the best guy available. Another former student of Joe Satriani as well. I think this because Testament's future at that moment in time would have been so uncertain, with Chuck Billy having throat cancer. The band might not have even have got back together again. So I think he would have accepted Metallica's request like that, easy. And then after that, I think they would go on tour, and then they'd start working on their new album. And in 2006, I think they would release Death Magnetic, a couple of years earlier than in Real Life. I think it would sound similar to Real Life. I think they'd go back to their old sound and add some more progressive elements in there. It'd be a bit more progressive thrash. And like in Real Life, there'd be an instrumental, and the album would be very close to Justice for All in terms of sound. Alex's performance would be fantastic, as you would expect. He would fit into their sound and their music perfectly. Cliff's songwriting and playing would also be fantastic as well. After this, I think they would release 2, maybe 3 more albums up to present day with this same lineup, all going down that progressive thrash sound. Like in Real Life, I think they'll appoint Greg Feldman to be their producer moving forward. Kirk would have been held as one of the greatest guitarists of all time, never forgotten. And Cliff would definitely be regarded as one of the best metal bass players of all time, and most influential, and also basically inventing progressive thrash as well. Obviously this is just a little bit of fun, speculate what could have been. I still think Cliff's one of the greatest and most influential metal bass players ever. He was just gone way too soon. 24 is just too young, really, for anyone to die. I just wanted to do this special episode for him, in his memory, and out of total respect for what he done for music and Metallica. Lastly, I just want to say I love Kirk Hammett as well. I wouldn't have liked to have killed him off, but I had to do it for the story, so yeah. So that has been my fanfic of What If Cliff Burton Never Died. I'd love to know what you thought of it, anything you would have done different, and whether you would have preferred this version of Metallica than the real life version of Metallica. It'll be quite interesting to know that. If you like this one, please go check out the previous episodes if you haven't already. I think the next one will be What If Dave Mustaine Stayed in Metallica, and that'll be coming out in the coming months. Thanks everyone for getting this far. If you got this far, thanks ever so much for watching. And until the next time, keep it metal.